Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Vestanland. In this episode, I am going to first start out by sort of building the outline of the future cargo harbor, and then we're going to go and do some infrastructure improvements, mainly along this main road. We're going to add a ton of cool things, kind of ton of cool details, kind of get the backbone of an industrial area kind of around the harbor, and also set up some rail infrastructure with the idea of kind of building a main train station for the town, probably in the next episode. And yeah, let's just get right into it. As you can see, I'm using these dock networks from Clues. They're inspired by the docks asset pack that Ronix made a while ago. And like many of Clues' assets, they have a ton of added functionality with the adaptive networks mod, which makes them super versatile. As you can see, I'm kind of playing around with the different surfaces and widths that I can use here, and then also using node controller to make the corners of this kind of key dock setup thing more straight. And yeah, in terms of inspiration for this harbor, you'll see I don't actually end up. This is going to be an episode in of itself down the line, but I'm taking some inspiration from kind of a couple of different smaller cities in sort of Northern Europe. I was looking at the harbor in Kristiansand in Norway, um, kind of a similar scale to what I think this is going to look like. And yeah, I'm kind of happy with the layout that I kind of end up getting sorted out by the end of the episode. I think it'll be a pretty good, um, yeah, pretty good setup, and I'll be able to build some cool stuff in a later episode, as I said. The kind of main idea of this harbor is it's going to be sort of the main cargo harbor for the west side of the country, and then it's also going to probably have a cruise ship terminal. I imagine that'll be how a lot of tourists get to the town. Um, and yeah, then it'll also be connected to a cargo rail line, which you'll see it kind of gets set up in sort of later on in the episode. And my sort of thinking with that is that the cargo rail will be important in the country, even though it's not that big of a country. Obviously, I think that'll be useful, especially since this is on kind of a there's like a really windy road. I imagine this historically anyway. They probably would have built a cargo line to carry things between both sides of the island. It might not be the most realistic, but I think it makes at least some sense, which is kind of all I'm going for. Um, and yeah, as I said, that'll be a little bit later on in the episode in terms of what I'm doing right now, because it's going to get kind of the roads set up. I'm going to be using just these kind of flat, basic roads because I'm going to add a lot of just kind of like stains and decals and stuff, and I don't want them to. I don't want to have to deal with the changes in elevation with the curbs and stuff. Um, and yeah, I also want this harbor to at least, I'm not sure how it'll end up working, but I do want to have some kind of fishing industry. I think that would make sense. Towns like this, coastal towns, probably, fishing industry is usually the kind of backbone of the economy. And maybe with this town, that was true in the past, and maybe it's more transition to tourism or other industries. But I definitely want to have some kind of fishing presence. Again, that'll be sort of its own episode where we kind of really dive into this port and all the different functionality and details and stuff that we can add. And yeah, in this particular episode, it's going to be more focused on getting that sort of set up for the future, and then kind of diving into the transportation infrastructure kind of surrounding the town. As I said, the main road. Um, we add a lot of like cool like signs and stuff. And yeah, get the road network fleshed out a little bit more. I also do a little bit of work with the changes in elevation, and you can see here kind of just doing a little bit of terraforming, even with these subtle sort of terrain differences. It's important to do. And yeah, now I'm going to move on to the main highway, kind of that connects the town to the rest of the island, rest of the country. As you can see, we have this kind of roundabout, which it came with the map because I built the map and I built this roundabout here with the idea of building a town in this location at some point. As you can see, we have this kind of main north-south highway, which kind of just traces the coast, and then we have another highway which kind of winds through a mountain pass, and then they kind of meet sort of right outside the town. My sort of thinking with this is that obviously like there's going to be a lot of the congestion on the mountain pass road just because it's going to be super windy and kind of hard to traverse, and there's probably a lot of traffic that's going to end up going all the way around. um, that's kind of at least how I envisioned it. And then with the rail lines, you can see I don't end up actually connecting it to anything. And in terms of the terrain, for it to be at the surface, it's going to probably need to go all the way around, like I said. But I'm thinking for maybe a future episode, or at least part of a future episode, I might build like a base tunnel, or at least like the entrance and kind of infrastructure around that would kind of cut right through the mountains. I think that would be kind of a cool idea to connect that this future train station up to the rest of the country. Um, but yeah, again, that's sometime in the future. Right now, I'm just going to do a lot of detailing on this roundabout because I'm pretty happy with this as being, at least for now, the main entrance to the town. I'm again using the same concrete highway networks that I've always been using in the series. And with intersection marking tool, I'm using the decorative networks, which again I used on a similar project outside of Nyrstad a couple episodes back. Um, these are super helpful with the new intersection marking tool functionality where you can assign decorative networks to lanes like this. Makes it super easy to make these nodes look really realistic. As you can see, there's going to be it's going to be a little rough around the edges with sort of lines kind of overlapping with the decorative networks, but I think I do a pretty good job at the end of the day of hiding some of that stuff. And yeah, I'll end up just being able to copy and paste some of these details to the other nodes of the intersection. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with how it ends up looking. And I think this roundabout it's going to be a pretty good entrance, like I said, to the town. And then we can kind of build a lot of other things around it. And yeah, I kind of did. I sort of made a point to make this look sort of, I mean, not really overgrown, but like kind of focus on some of the natural details around it. You'll kind of see that with a little bit. I do some overpasses and stuff where focus on adding some of the grass and bushes and shrubs and dirt to kind of again make things look a little more realistic. I also, as you can see, I have a like asymmetrical road leading from the town center to the roundabout, and I think this will make a little bit more sense with the traffic flow. As you can see, I also kind of use node controller to stretch things out and get these networks to fit together a little bit better. But yeah, there's on all the other sides of the roundabout, it's just one lane coming in, and then on this one we have two lanes coming in, one of which just immediately goes to, I guess it'd be the south, and the one which can go east or north. I think that makes sense. And yeah, we'll have to think a little bit about some of the development on either side of the town and maybe where these different highways are leading to. I'm kind of imagining that there's going to be some kind of mountain resort town, probably like a ski resort or something on the mountain kind of in the background, which I think will be a cool project as well. And yeah, I think in terms of the actual gameplay, again, I don't focus on the gameplay a ton, but as we get to build more, this roundabout might get a little bit congested. We'll have to think about how to maybe have like some kind of bypass or something. But again, that's kind of all down the line. I'm also going to do some work detailing this intersection to kind of connect the roundabout to the center of town, which I built in the last episode. And yeah, as you can see, I don't really place a ton of buildings. I do a little bit of industrial building later on in the video, but I think in the next episode, I mentioned I'll probably focus on the main train station. I'll probably also try to just do a little bit of infill buildings just to kind of connect these different projects together. I'm imagining, obviously, the part we built in the last video is kind of the main kind of old town center type thing. And I'm imagining there'll be some more modern buildings kind of around this highway and connecting the train station to the town center. I'm kind of thinking that the train station will be a pretty modern building. Maybe it'll be like, maybe having been recently renovated or replaced. Yeah, just kind of a little bit out of the town center, kind of closer to the cargo line. Yeah, all that's just kind of brainstorming for the future. I'm again using the intersection marking tool to add some steel barriers to the highway And you'll see that this kind of cuts into the terrain here. I end up doing a little bit of, I mean, this is kind of a little bit of overkill, I think, probably for a town this size, creating this kind of trench that cuts into the highway. Yeah, again, this is probably a little bit much for a town this size, like I said, but you know what? I think it looks cool, so it's gonna have to work. The really cool thing that I end up doing here is building kind of like a bike highway network almost. Again, using the same kind of bike paths that I've used in other parts of the city. And unfortunately, I did end up losing a little bit of coverage, or not coverage, a little bit of footage from when I detailed this area. Um, but yeah, you can see that this network is kind of it's completely separated from the car traffic, which will be nice. And if you guys remember when we built the town of Norbakken, we had kind of a similar type of thing where we had a bike lane kind of stretching along the highway. And my thought with that is that the this network of bike lanes probably goes around the entire country, so you can kind of cycle from any part of the country to any other part, which I think would be really cool. And yeah, I kind of like the idea of having this kind of this being like a focus of the infrastructure in the downtowns of the cities, and then maybe as it goes out into like a more rural area, it kind of just becomes like a simple gravel path, but it kind of it kind of has kind of special importance in the downtown area. This is an area where it's going to cross over the just kind of regular surface streets. Again, it kind of is going to when it sort of connects to the major intersections like the roundabout, it's going to go above the traffic, and then as it gets kind of farther out with the lower traffic volume roads, it's going to just cross them at grade, which I think makes more sense. Um, and then yeah, you'll see the bike lane kind of just like goes down to be parallel with the highway as it goes further north. And yeah, I end up using the one yeah, again, I guess the one problem with this network of bike lanes, even though they look super good, they don't connect to roads because they're paths and not roads. So I use just kind of some dummy roads to make an intersection here. Um, I'm actually not sure if it's going to end up. It's worked for me in the past using that strategy, so I'm hoping that people will actually be able to use it. But we'll see how it works. I guess in the future. Again, I'm using the same kind of retaining walls. These are the retaining walls with the sound wall barriers on them, which again I think just it looks a little bit better, adds a little more visual interest, which I think is good. And then I'm using kind of just the basic retaining walls to create sort of an abutment and kind of to cover up some of the terrain clipping, again, which is I think is helpful. I've also tried to make sure that there's enough pillars sort of along this network so it doesn't look like it's just kind of floating in the air, which is something it's easy to forget about. And honestly, I probably could have added more pillars in places, but I think it looks all right. I also, as you can see, this is where I'm putting a ton of these dirt decals and kind of trying to blend them together and sink them into the ground, which I think does a lot to sort of make this look a little more realistic. I'm not really sure what I'm going to build right along the kind of highway trench. Obviously, there's kind of just concrete there. If you guys have any ideas of what I could put there, I might do another like pedestrian overpass or something. Obviously, we have two roads and the bike sort of highway crossing over above the highway. That is, yeah. There's probably something else that could be done. So yeah, again, if you guys have any ideas, let me know. This is another cool little project, cool detail that I'm adding to the project. Anyway, I'm sort of making like a bike parking lot here. My thought with this is that people could maybe cycle into the town and then park their bikes here, and so they can just walk around kind of the old town, which doesn't have any um, dedicated cycle infrastructure. um, I think this would be cool again as like a both for tourists, maybe it's like a tourist activity, but it also could be um, a way that maybe people like commute into the town if they live in kind of more of a rural area outside of it. And yeah, again, all these props that you can find. I think Ronix made the bicycles that I end up using, and then these bike racks. I'm not really sure where they're from, but you can find them on the workshop. Um, and yeah, it's just a huge relief to be able to find literally any type of prop or small decal that you need for to build like a super detailed project. So yeah, and again, I feel like I say it in every video, but it's definitely worth saying. Huge thanks to the asset creators um, who make this game possible to be played in the way that I play it. Um, and yeah, with that being said, I'm just kind of continuing to place a bunch of these bicycles down. Again, these aren't necessarily functional within the game, but it adds adds a lot of detail. I think it looks really good. Um, and yeah, again, I think it's important, at least for me, when I'm trying to build something realistic, to kind of, if there's a piece of infrastructure, it's kind of, even if it's not necessarily functional within game, I think it's worth um, sort of placing down details to like indicate what it's being used for. And yeah, I think that's kind of a strategy I've used in previous episodes, previous projects within the series. Um, and yeah, I think this is a good example of that. Just kind of, again, even if like people in game aren't actually using this bike lane to travel like across the country, because that's not really how the game is built. You can imagine that, again, like if you're a tourist or someone who likes cycling, you might seek out this route because it's goes kind of around the coast and in the mountains and stuff. So yeah, I think that's a cool little additional detail. And yeah, I'm just kind of finishing up this little area with some stains and stuff. I'm also adding the sidewalks to the intersection. As you can see, I'm doing the obviously in the previous, I have these, like, I talked about this in the last episode, but having these sort of train platform networks as the sidewalks, so I can use them with intersection marking tool, is a really great strategy. But then I'm kind of switching to kind of just plain pavement or asphalt sidewalks further out, probably in areas that are a little bit more modern or aren't necessarily in like a tourist district. And then I talked about this in the last episode also, but adding these traffic lights, this is something I'm definitely going to do in this town that I didn't really focus on in the bigger cities in the project, just because it was going to get really tedious. But with a town of this scale, there's only going to be a few intersections like this that have traffic lights. So I'm doing my best to make sure that they're as accurate as possible. And yeah, I think that's another thing that goes a long way to kind of creating a sense of realism. And yeah, now I'm going to do something I always enjoy doing, is putting in these procedural object road signs. And as you can see, just adding these are just like some of the small details that really make this feel like a real place. I mean, I have as I said before, having this mountain pass road is the road that goes directly to Nyrstad, and then the roads going north and south are don't really. I mean, I don't have any towns on the map that they go to. I mean, we could. I guess that's another thing I can ask you guys for. If you have ideas for the name of this town, or maybe other towns that may or may not be built in the area, so we can at least put them on the signs. Yeah, let me know. I'm also, as you can see, putting in the road numbers. We have. I made a map of this, I think, like a little while ago, just kind of a crude outline of where the major highways go, and I think the M3 is going to be the road that goes kind of through the mountains, and then again the M1 is the one that kind of is the eastern coast of the island, and then the M2 is kind of the western coast. So in this situation, the M2 goes kind of the road that's going kind of parallel to the coast, and the M3 is the mountain pass. Yeah, and again, going back to what I was saying at the beginning of the video, I imagine that the road going through the mountain pass was probably a relatively recent project. I imagine it used to be you had to kind of go all the way around. And again, I was talking about this a little bit with the cargo rail infrastructure, which I'm going to build. I think, yeah, in like a earlier time when they didn't have any way to go sort of directly through the mountains, it probably would have made more sense to have cargo trains that sort of went all the way around, because, yeah, if trucks could, or if it was like only a dirt or unpaved road or something, then obviously you couldn't carry large amounts of freight through there. Yeah, I guess that's kind of the rationale for a couple of different things in the series. And yeah, now I'm going back to the rail infrastructure. As you can see, I kind of laid out this kind of the track layout for a terminal station here. And yeah, then I'm gonna have kind of a freight line branching off from it, kind of going towards the port. Again, I have to do a little bit more research in exactly how these work in terms of the kind of optimal layout for them. I kind of looked at Google Earth just to get a basic idea of how some of these areas function. I mean, just at least how they look, maybe not how they function in real life, but Yeah, I think it makes sense to have. You'll see, I end up putting down a couple of dummy tracks just kind of in the area to maybe give the illusion that more of them are connected up to the main line. Um, and yeah, here I'm sort of blocking off the area that I'm going to use. I'm going to sort of end up building a station in. Again, I like the idea of having maybe there'll be like an old station like facade or something, but then maybe there'll be some modern elements to it as well. Yeah, something like that I think could be really interesting. Um, but before that, I'm going to place down just a couple of generic warehouse buildings, kind of flesh this area out. I also build I have to think a little bit more about how I'm going to transition from this area to the kind of primarily residential area between here and the old town. You'll see right here, I'm placing down these kind of modern brick buildings, which I think are going to, at least sort of in the backstory of the series, I think are going to function as the kind of maybe logistics company offices that kind of maybe operates out of the port. And I think that'll do a good job of transitioning between the industrial area and again, sort of more of the residential or commercial areas to the east, or I guess it would be the south in this case. I'm also doing a lot of this kind of dingy industrial detailing, which I think is always find kind of interesting. Even though it's not the most like aesthetically pleasing type of detailing to do, just adding kind of some dirt roads and kind of weeds and overgrown bushes and stuff in behind these warehouses. I think it sort of adds a lot of character to this part of the city. As you can see, I'm kind of having these warehouses. Obviously, they're not wall to wall or anything, but they kind of follow the contours of both the rail line and kind of the terrain a little bit, which I think helps to again make this look a little more realistic. And most of these are actual buildings, so they'll be functional in game as I think just as commercial space. So yeah, down the line, hopefully we'll get some people kind of traveling this area, and yeah, get like that. That'll sort of help it make it feel a little more alive. I'm not sure exactly how functional when I sort of build all this cargo infrastructure with the port and the train line. I'm not sure if I'll be able to make it fully functional or not, but at the very least, there should be people coming and going from this area, even if it is just kind of like a generic office type place. Um, and yeah, now as you can see, I ended up turning a lot of those roofs the same color again to kind of I didn't want it to stand out too much. And then this is where I'm adding a ton of these weeds and bushes and stuff. I ended up using these are kind of the smaller ones. I have some of these ones here, which are like kind of these generic brown plants, but then I end up using kind of the brown grass as kind of the main sort of cover for this kind of these dirt areas, which I think looks really good. I found yeah, these ones right here are super detailed, and when you kind of mix them all together and sort of sink them in the terrain a little bit, I think it looks, at least from especially from these kind of like low angle shots, I think it looks super realistic. So just kind of placing a bunch of those down in kind of areas that maybe again, like maybe the trucks and stuff don't travel on, um, placing them kind of right up against the train tracks. Again, it's little details like this that maybe you don't think about, but make a city kind of come to life and look really interesting. Same thing with the general like stain decals and stuff. Obviously, as an industrial area, it's going to have some kind of rough around the edges parts. And then with the roads, I'm not going to spend a ton of time detailing those intersections. I imagine they're kind of more bare bones than some of the more heavily pedestrianized areas. But again, it's important to add even the little details because again they add a lot of character to especially to areas like this. This is kind of the last part of the episode, I guess, where I'm kind of again playing around with how the rail line is going to kind of enter the industrial area and kind of interface with the port. There's definitely more. I definitely have more to do with this spot. As you can see, it ends up being a little bit higher elevation than the actual dock network. I could always move the dock up a little bit just to make it the same elevation. I might end up doing that. Because I don't know. I don't think this would be necessarily the most realistic to have kind of just a couple of foot increase in height for no real reason. So yeah, I'll end up probably changing this a little bit down the line. But yeah, I think it looks interesting, at least for now. And you can see I use the kind of same trick with having the ploppable pavement as as procedural objects, kind of just making this all one uniform layer, and then having it kind of blend into the hill, like the hillside, the change in elevation. Yeah, again, using the same kind of retaining wall structures that I've used in other places, namely in like the kind of the highway retaining walls and yeah, stuff like that. As you can see, there's sort of a little bit of again, I sort of talked about this very slight elevation change between the dock and these roads. Yeah, the more I think about it, the more I think I'll probably just move the dock up a few feet to kind of smooth things out. I think that would be a little more realistic, but yeah, I think that's probably something I can change down the line. Here I'm adding a few of these extra tracks. Obviously, they aren't connected right now, but I think that'll make or at least gives us more of a sense of scale of how big this area is going to be and how big the sort of cargo yard's going to be. I think it'll also help when I add I'll add a bunch of containers and stuff and so a ton of props to kind of fill things out. That's I sort of have this big open space right now where again I'm adding some stains, adding some decals to kind of give some texture to it. But yeah, it's obviously not finished yet. The very last part of the episode is I'm going to place down a bunch of these surface rocks on kind of the coastline here. Obviously, we're going to have some kind of beach areas, namely kind of right on the town center waterfront, but areas like this are going to be pretty rocky and exposed. So I figured it'd be good to kind of focus on that, at least to kind of give a good background for the next few episodes when I kind of build out the actual infrastructure in this area. And I'm using these like prop ground surface coverage grass things, which again are super helpful for covering large areas and making them look pretty good. Yeah, and then kind of blending in some of the smaller ones along this kind of sea break type thing. Yeah, and then filling out the trees and all that. So yeah, I'm kind of right at the end of the episode. I want to thank you guys again for tuning in, watching this episode of Vestanland. I really appreciate it. If you want to get more connected with the channel, you can click on some of the links below. And yeah, hopefully I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.